Hello, everyone. Very happy to have this panel discussion. Uh, the topic is what were the two good things and the two bad policies that India adopted in its first 20 years that still resonate today. So, are we path dependent? What it's showing is that we are path dependent. We are stuck with the bad policies still, and of course, we are still benefiting from some of the good policies. There's a first, third, and final panel. I'm very happy that there are two young people here who are going to be the speakers. First is Pooja Goel, and then second Rajat Singh Yadav. And then, of course, we have Professor Sudarshan and my friend TC Raghavan. So let's get started. Pooja, please introduce
So,
yourself.
hello all.
Please introduce yourself
Yes,
and
sir.
get going.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
So, hello all. I am Pooja. Currently, I am doing PhD in economics from University of Hyderabad. Also, like before doing PhD, I worked with Citibank as credit risk analyst. So, but I thought of doing higher studies, so that's why I switched to PhD economics. Thank you, Professor Subodh. First of all, thank you so much for giving me this opportunity to talk about some good policies and bad policies from like that India adopted between 1947 and 1967, and that also, resonates with India today. So how can we connect them with today? So thank you for that. So yes, I'll try to justify on my part. I have tried to, comprehend this well. I'll just start. So shall I start, sir?
Yes, please.
Yes, sir. So first of all, I'll start with one of the policy program, that is a Community Development Program of 1952. So according to me, it marked basically the beginning of the organized rural development in India. And over the years, we have IRDP, like Integrated Rural Development Program, the National Rural Employment Program, Manrega. So they basically introduced to promote agriculture and rural employment and infrastructure development. So these also, like that time, during like first 5 year plan, it was necessary. During that time our economy was predominantly agrarian, and it requires rural development. So this CDP, this community development program, laid basically, as you mentioned in your panel discussion about green revolution. So this community development program laid the foundation of the green revolution there. So which transformed into a food surplus nation. So crop yield there significantly increased, and especially for wheat and rice growing regions. Then wage employment, what other impacts were? Wage employment for millions were increased in rural areas. And then we have also we saw that the rural distress migration was reduced and the employment was increased. And then the rural wages was like, there was the rural development was increased therefore. And the other positive impacts were connectivity improved, and increased it boosted rural urban trade and access to markets there. So what is the like, this is a program which introduced back in 1952. So I think like it has a positive impact, or what is its relevance today? So in COVID-19 pandemic, we see like Manrega, it which employed in 100 days of guaranteed employment. So it reduced rural distress there. So the COVID-19 pandemic, we saw that the community development program has a positive impact. And then the digital and the financial inclusion was there. We saw Jan Dhan Yojana and the Prime Minister Kisan Yojana. Then also we have like, so it shows basically the positive sides of increased agriculture productivity, and then the improved rural wages and the rural infrastructure growth, also the financial inclusion, as I mentioned earlier. So some things, some more things we need to do here is like, we can improve the digital technology, prevent corruption in rural areas. And as we can see, we have China's, rural industrialization. China's rural industrialization focused on township and village enterprises. So there we have increased rural manufacturing jobs, and so strengthening rural non-farm industries to reduce the dependency is from my side we should focus on. And we should focus on China's rural industrialization model based on township and village enterprises. So one was that, and another I'll go brief on industrial. The second good thing is industrial policy resolution. So there we have in 1948 and then in 1956, and the 1956 was, I think, the most prominent one, and then in the 1977. So it was a basically foundational economic policy which shaped India's industrial development after independence, and it also, laid down the groundwork for state-led industrialization. And in 1947, as we all know, that we have underdeveloped agrarian economy, limited industrial infrastructure. So the rapid industrialization was there, and it was recognized as a key to economic self-sufficiency and employment generation. And as that time, Jawaharlal Nehru, our prime minister, was also influenced by Soviet style central planning, but they sought to maintain a mixed economy which balanced state control over private enterprises. So we have state-owned sector, then mixed sector, then private sector based on consumers and small-scale enterprises. So the positive impacts for rapid industrialization growth were there, and we could saw the 6% uh, jump from 15% jump from 6% in 1950s. So the import dependency reduced, and the jobs were increased there, and the leakages also reduced. So what is the or all, and also we can see there was a promotion of regional industrialization. So industrial growth in backward areas by setting up public sector units in different states, like Bhilai steel plant was there, Bokaro steel plant, and Rourkela steel plant. So it provided jobs and boosted local economies there. And we have seen that it reduced dependence on foreign imports also. So how it is relevant today is that like we can see today, Make in India program, Atmanirbhar Bharat. So the Delhi Mumbai industrial corridor is there. So the modern adoption of this industrial policy resolution resonates with India today also. So the influence of economic liberalization we can see. So the success it successfully laid down the foundation for industrialization and encouraged self-sufficiency and infrastructure development. So another thing I will focus on, is in the terms of relevance. So it strengthened our public sector units like ONGC, SAIL, BHAIL, and then it focused on MSMEs also. So the PLI linked incentive scheme. So it provided financial incentives and easier credit access, then promoting regional and balanced industrial development, as I mentioned earlier, and also it reduced import dependence and promoting self-reliance, as I mentioned about Atmanirbhar Bharat, and we also we are also focusing on our semiconductor industry shifting from China and Taiwan. So we can see the stronger domestic India right now, and a global manufacturing hub is through MSMEs we can resonate with India today. Now, coming on to the bad thing, this, I will, according to my viewpoint, if you all know about freight equalization policy of 1952, this was basically introduced to, for balanced development across the countries, industrial development, so that we can have a balanced industrial development across whole our country. But what it did, it 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 uh, it increased the regional disparities in our industrialization. So it was basically introduced in 1952 to ensure that industries across India had equal access to all the key raw materials. So for that, what government did was it subsidizes the transportation cost and make so that these materials can be available to at the same price. Like what are the raw materials available for the natural rich states like Jharkhand, West Bengal, Odisha. So there, the rich resources, the western region like Gujarat and Karnataka should also benefit from that. So the government subsidized transportation costs, making these materials available at the same price across the country for equal access to these resources. But it decentralized industrial growth in mineral rich states like Bihar, Odisha, and Jharkhand and Chhattisgarh. So instead of industry setting up near natural resources states like Bihar or Odisha, the industry was concentrated in western and southern states like Maharashtra, Gujarat, and Tamil Nadu. So it deepened regional economic inequalities. And if we go from economics theory of comparative advantage and Weber's theories, like the industry should be set up there where we have the low cost low cost of raw materials. So there also we fail in that. So because it created somewhat what I see is artificial price equalization, because the government subsidizes the cost of raw materials there. So yeah. So according to me, this was the freight equalization policy, which I thought it was bad, because the regional economic disparities increased and deindustrialization of Eastern India we can see. uh, and before independence, we could see that West Bengal was India's leading industrial hub. But by 1970s and 1980s, industrial growth stagnated in West Bengal. And Bihar, despite its rich and coal and iron reserves, it remained underdeveloped with high poverty rates and low industrial development. So we could also see loss of comparative advantage because of this trade equalization policy and in mineral rich regions. And again, this artificial price equalization led to inefficient resource allocation and economic distortion. So, like, again, we can see here the China's. So China set its industries near natural reserves like steel production in Hebei, and then the coal production process in Zanzai. So there we can follow that China's thing. Then we have underdevelopment and out migration because of this. The people, like, there was so much of migration. People from Bihar, Jharkhand, and Odisha were shifted to. There were job losses, and they were going to settle for the jobs in um western region of Maharashtra, Gujarat. So this from my side, these are the good and bad things what I will what I have thought of. And
Yeah. Pooja, I missed your second point, or the second bad point. I thought you talked about the freight equalization. What's the second point?
second point, as in like about underdeveloped and by the job losses.
But was that a government policy, or I didn't quite
Yeah, it was. Yeah, freight equalization policy was introduced in 1952 by the government to equalize the prices, because the
So
to
that I
equalize the
got.
prices so that.
That I got.
Hmm,
Okay. But what's the
hmm.
second policy that you mentioned?
Second policy, bad policy.
Yes.
Or I haven't mentioned, like, I have tried
Okay.
to
All
I
right.
just
Okay. Now, this rate equalization was only on the railway, correct?
yes, sir.
Yes. Okay.
So
Fine.
but it has
Yes.
economic impacts all over we
Right.
can
But
see
this
the
railway, yeah, just
eastern
to be
western divide we can see.
Yeah,
Hmm.
just to be clear. Okay, thank you, Pooja. This is very good. I really did want to hear from young people. And what you've said is actually a surprise to me because I didn't think these were the policies, but the whole point was to give everybody a chance to say what they think. And so I'm really glad that you have thought it through and presented it very clearly. So next, thank you, Pooja. Next, we have Rajat Singh Yadav. He has a PhD already, and he'll tell us all about himself and continue with the presentation, with the discussion. So Rajat, please.
Yeah, I am not able to open my video. I don't know, it's disabled by the host. Can you allow me to?
Okay, hang on. Uh, why would the host do these nasty things to you?
Disable.
Hang on. Let's see if I can find you at all here. Hang on. Okay, yeah, I might have hit it by mistake. Okay. Can you get to it now?
Uh, just a second. No, still disabled. Okay, then it's fine. I can
No,
speak.
hang on. Just 1 second. We need to see you when you are talking. Okay, you are still asked to start video. Okay, so you have to start the
Yes.
video. There you are. Okay, good. Thank you, Rajat, for being here. So please introduce yourself a bit and then let's hear from you.
Hello, good evening, everyone. I am Rajat Singh Yadav. I have completed my PhD from Gokhale Institute of Politics and Economics. Currently, I am working as a consultant in Women's World Banking, working in the financial inclusion area and the MSMEs also. So, thank you, Professor Subodh. Again, nice to see you. Last year we met when I didn't get my PhD, but I was in my final stage. So again this time I promised last time we will meet again, so thank you for calling me this time with a proper session. So just hear me out. I'll start with simple things. So, can I start?
Yeah, please.
Okay. So, as Pooja mentioned about the 5-year plans and all, so I'll start with your two good policies where you mentioned about the democratic rights which Indian Constitution provide from its very beginning, and basically the women rights, which is very rare among the world countries, among the world. But along with that, we faced very low saving rates, very low literacy rates, and there were so many development economic problems we had during that time. So for to conquer all of those problems, India started with the 5-year plan, and it's basically based on the adopted from the USSR, that is based on the socialism, and which in the terminology it's called imperative planning. According to the imperative planning, it means market forces are replaced by the plan, and imperatives generally passed on by the state. So, as you mentioned in your video, like too much power is given to the central and less power is provided to the state. So, because there were so many problems happened at the local level, so it should be coming from the top to down approach. And so, the comprehensive planning is a type of planning in which a master plan having a future vision ranging from short to long term goals and objectives for all activities is formulated. Government itself participates in growth process. Public and private sector may not coexist, but this is the planning sector which we adopted just after the independence, and started with the primary sector. And that primary sector is the agriculture, and that is basically adopted from the economic model, that is Harrod-Domer model. And according to the Harrod-Domer model, the Indian economist at that time adopted and focused on the broad macroeconomic models and try to determine the possible growth rates of national income and the relationship between different economic sectors and variables like saving and investment. As I mentioned, the saving rate was very low. At that time, it was 3% only in the 1951. And the first 5-year plan seek to establish a consistent relationship between the desired targeted rate of growth of national income and the total amount of saving required to attain the growth rate through the increment investment capital output ratio. So that is the fundamental economic growth model, which basically says how much saving you should require to growth to get the national income of the country. And so that the result of the first economic growth, the first 5-year plan, was we reduced the food import by zero point 0.5 trillion only, not that much, but we reduced a bit in those 5 years, because that is the ground for the next 5-year plans, because the next 5-year plans is based on the industries, and the Mahalanobis, Nehru Mahalanobis model, so-called Nehru Mahalanobis model, is focused on the heavy industries, which basically says we should focus on the coal industry, electric industry, and all the capital good industry, so that would create the bedrock for the future growth and investment. But so in that Mahalanobis model, it emphasized on the long run rapid rate of industrialization and growth of national economy, which depends on the capacity of capital formation. So one important aim was to make India independent growth of producer goods, so that accumulation of capital could not be hampered by difficulties in securing supplies of essential producer goods from other countries. Because starting with the self-reliant, the concept which now India is adopted after the COVID-19, and before of it the Atmanirbhar Bharat, that was itself started in the just after the independence, also based on the 5-year planning commission and the models also. And that model is based on the heavy forward and backward linkages. The role of public sector was paramount as compared to the private sector. The format was the engine of the public sector was the engine of growth of heavy industries and infrastructure. Private sector was unlikely to venture into this sector, which had low productivity and a long gestation period. Private sector was to play a complementary role expanding consumer goods. All the things were fine. The Nehru Malabis model was based on the capital goods, public sector, and most importantly, the import substitution. but still we didn't get what we aim for. There were so many criticism happened to the Nehru Malanimis portal, the famous criticism by the Vakil and Bharmanand, and they contrasted to the Malanovis model during the second and third 5-year plan. According to Vakil, growth rate of an economy depend on both economic and non-economic factors, not just the capital accumulation is not just the only factor drives the economic growth. In his point of view, capital accumulation is the most important factor, which further depends on technical progress. And as I mentioned, we had very low literacy rate, very low technology, very low infrastructure. So the non-economic factors like institutional unemployment problem should be tackled without sacrificing technical progress and rapid capital accumulation. So it was not in a complementary way. It was in a different silos, starting with the agriculture, focus on agriculture. Second is focus on the industry. According to Vakil and Barbana, there should be a complementary, not substitution. So India, being a very poor nation, has fixity of capital and limited wage goods, both of which lead to inflation and unemployment. So what was the postulate by the Vakil is like transferring surplus manpower from agri sector to capital sector is warranted for economic growth and transformation, but this process is not self-pushing. This exists wage good gap where the demand for wage good is not satisfied, and government should provide the food grains as wage goods so that labor in the capital goods sector earns more as they consume more. The model suggested that disguised unemployment be regarded as potential savings. So transferring labor leads to increased consumption as income increases working in industrial sector. So at the lower consumption level, productivity can be less. The demand for consumption dependent on size of market. The limited size of market further lower income and consumption need. So that there are pros and cons of the Malanambis model. And if we talk about uh, the path which we followed after the independence and what we are doing right now, so I don't think so that is the aim of this session, because we are talking about in the initial 20 years. So I think in the next future session we talk about what is happening in the current scenarios. But just after the independence, good things happened, but not in a properly complementary way. There were thinking in the substitution. That is the major bad policy according to my point of view. It should come in the complementary way, and thinking about the inflation unemployment problem at the same time of the heavy industries and the import substitution problem for the infant industries. So I think that's all from my side.
Okay, thank you so much, Rajat. Once again, I'm a little bit surprised to hear what you're saying, but that's the whole point, to hear what other people have to say. So thank you so much. Next up is Professor Sudarshan. He's hiding somewhere, but he'll appear, I'm sure.
Yeah, I'm here. I'm here.
He's the dean of the School of Public Policy at OP Jindal University. Let's listen to him.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Now this is my 13th year as the dean of the School of Public Policy, which we started in a very young university, and mine was I think, the third school. And the university started in 2009 with law and then international relations. And so I've been here all this time. And before this, I worked for some 22 years in the United Nations Development Program in various places in India, Indonesia, in Oslo, in Norway, and in the regional office in Bangkok, which took me to many Asian countries for about 7 years. And I took early retirement and joined the university. I've been educated in Central College, Bangalore, Delhi School of Economics, Balliol College, Oxford, St. John's College, Cambridge. And I greatly enjoy the work I now do. And I'm very pleased that Subodh is drawing out young people who are extremely impressive and giving them a platform to air their views, as you have done and Pooja has done this evening. On the topic concerned, I think we are extremely lucky. India is extremely lucky to have had a constituent assembly of the kind that we got. This was not it's not a popular elected assembly. The franchise of elections in the British Raj, the British provinces, was rather limited. And then we had a number of prime ministers or diwans from the 565 independent states which owed allegiance to the British monarch but were not part of British India, sent their representatives. And it was an assembly that to some extent was dominated by the Indian National Congress and initially also represented with the Muslim League. But I think we were very lucky to have had an assembly of that kind. We were lucky to have visionary leaders. For instance, Mahatma Gandhi insisted that even though Dr. Ambedkar lost a seat in the Constituent Assembly in Bombay, that the party should help him acquire a seat through Bengal. And he came into the Constituent Assembly elected from Bengal because in spite of all their differences over many things, Gandhi wanted Ambedkar in the Constituent Assembly. And it's to the credit of the leaders of that time that not only was Ambedkar inducted into the cabinet, the interim cabinet, which functioned as a sort of a temporary cabinet before the Constitution came into force as the law minister, but also elected him to be the draftsperson, the chairperson of the drafting committee of the Constitution. Now, this is extraordinary in the annals of history. You want to think about it. It's really one of those unique events in world history where you had an interim parliament that had Dr. Ambedkar bitterly opposed, of course, to the Indian National Congress and its policies, very much opposed to Mr. Gandhi's views on representation of Dalits and Muslims in separate electorates for them, which is what he favored. And we had, Shama Prasad Mukherjee, the founder of the Hindu Mahasabha, in the cabinet and in the Constituent Assembly. K. Munshi in the Constituent Assembly. I think it was, and then the diwans of these different states, including Diwan, I must mention, Gopalaswamy Iyengar, who represented Kashmir in the Constituent Assembly. So we were extraordinarily lucky to have an assembly of that kind. It's not that it came about through adult franchise. It's when the Constitution says, we the people of India, it's not really we the people of India. I mean, it's really that the people of India have been given a constitution and they are told, look, adopt and cherish this constitution. It's not that they can claim ownership for it. So that's the first good thing that's happened to India. So you just have to look at what happened to the attempts to create a constitution in Pakistan. And when Bangladesh was created, there was a constitution that was drafted by very good people. And then what happened? Sheikh Mujib gets assassinated. The Bangladesh secular constitution becomes the Islamic Republic of Bangladesh. And everywhere, I mean, you look around, same thing with Sri Lanka. Bandaranaike comes into office, she says, Sinhala only, amends the constitution. And then you have the beginnings of a serious ethnic conflict with the Tamils, who are a significant number in the north and in the hill regions where there are tea plantations. So none of our neighbors has done well with their constitutional history. And we've had a constitution that survives. It's the 75th year of the constitution. So I think, I would just put this down to a certain set of circumstances. It's not that it was engineered by anybody. It is simply that the people living at that time who cared for the future of this country drafted this magnificent constitution. So that survives. And our job now is to how to how to keep that constitution intact and going. In the Constituent Assembly itself, they gave enormous powers to the judiciary. No other constitution in the world gives the kind of powers that our judiciary has. Our judiciary, the Constitution says that the law declared by the Supreme Court is the law of the land. It's not just Parliament that makes laws for the land. The judicial decisions are the law of the land, says the Constitution. It also says that the judiciary may make a decision in the interests of complete justice. Now, this phrase complete justice means you don't have to argue the point. You don't have to say, this side has said this and this side has that. So one example of complete justice, of course, is what Justice Chandrachud did in the Ayodhya case, to say, look, there's so much anxiety and, yearning on the part of these Hindus that they want to build that temple for Rama there. Let them have it. It's not in consonance with what was really a title dispute. Who had title to that land? It was the Muslims, quite clearly. But in the interest of complete justice, the court says, take the land, build the temple, and then we'll give you 5 acres of land, you build a grand mosque in Ayodhya. None of the parties to the case argued that they wanted 5 acres and wanted an alternative land. But this is how the Supreme Court tried to resolve what was essentially a political problem. It ought to have been resolved politically, but because we've entrusted our judiciary with so much power, that the judiciary then had to find out some way of dealing with the problem, and it did. And of course, the risk when you do this, when you politicize a judicial problem, or when you judicialize a political problem like Ayodhya, you run the risk of, undermining the judiciary. So that's a threat that lies ahead for us now. So the first point is, but we must be, and the Constitution was subjected to a detailed review by Justice Venkatachalaya's committee at the instance of the government of Atal Bihari Vajpayee. They went through all of the things that could have gone wrong, that needed fixing in the Constitution, and you had the Venkatachalaya committee that basically concluded that this is a terrific Constitution. You don't have to meddle with it too much. We may want to kind of consider whether you want elections together, save some money here and there. But so the best thing that's happened to India is its Constitution. Secondly, I'd say that the other best thing that happened, but which is still in the realm of possibility, not fully realized, is the 73rd and 74th Amendments to the Constitution. This is something Gandhi had always insisted, that you should make decisions at the local level where problems are solved by people at the local level. There may be some problems that need to be solved at a higher level, but if you think about it, the original objectives resolution moved by Prime Minister Nehru in our Constituent Assembly was that the central government would concern itself with currency, telecommunications and post and telegraphs, and foreign policy and defense policy. All other matters would be devolved to the states. Partition changed that. And partition changed that because there was so much killing and dying of people that the idea that you kind of devolve it to the provinces and they'll manage it somehow seemed to be completely unrealistic. But you needed a strong center and a strong home minister like the kind that Sardar Patel was, to not only manage the country in terms of riots, but also to unify the country in terms of getting 563 something principalities to sign up to join the Indian Union. So he and V.P. Menon are heroes of our Constitution. They managed to put India together in the way it is. But one mistake that happened because of the circumstances, which Sardar Patel is responsible for, is our civil service. Throughout the nationalist movement, Nehru said that the Indian civil service is neither Indian, because for the most part it was British, nor civil, because they were autocratic and they were lords. I mean, they were the Lord Sahibs and people waited on them. And, it was a feudal, terrible regime of people waiting on this big man who's a civil servant. And he said it's neither Indian nor civil in that sense, nor a service, because it was meant to collect revenue and it was not meant to develop the country. But because of partition, Sardar Patel moved an article in the Constitution calling upon the Indian civil service as a steel frame, allowing the Indian civil service officers to continue in their tenure till their retirement age, paid whatever the British had agreed to pay them, and guaranteed job security in Article 324 of the Constitution of India. And we now have the Indian Administrative Service, the Indian Police Service, and the Central Services, and then each of the states have their own services. Now, this has been bad because there is no accountability on the part of our civil service. Our civil service officers, initially they have been very good, but they have educated our politicians as to how to get around the law. Every politician who's engaged in some kind of corruption, I'm thinking of Raja and the allocation of spectrum, tutored by civil servants. And then you go to a court of law and the court of law finds it very difficult to say, pin down the responsibility on the minister for violating and robbing the exchequer of revenue that it ought to have had, because clever civil servants in cahoots with their political masters have helped them. So when Nehru retired, or when in 1964, just before he died, Nehru was asked, what is the single most failure? He said it's failure to reform the civil service. And so I think, though we had the great constitution, the great flaw in that constitution is guaranteeing security. I'll have to tell you this. I worked in China, and the Chinese wanted me to arrange for training in what's called the Bangalore report card. Now, there was a man called Samuel Paul who started a Center for Public Affairs in Bangalore, who created a survey where Bangalore citizens could tell on the survey, honestly, what they thought was the quality of service, garbage collection, street lighting, water supply, electricity, all of that. Year after year, for 25 years, that center has been publishing a report which is atrocious. The verdict of the Bangalore citizens on their municipality, their corporation, is abysmal. And yet, not a single officer has been called to account because they've got this guaranteed service. Nobody is answerable to it. And the report gets reported in the newspapers. It lasts for 2 days and forgotten. I asked the Chinese, why do you want the Bangalore report card? The Chinese said to me, we now rely on the party secretary, the Communist Party secretary, to tell us how the local government is doing. But the Communist Party secretary may have his own favors and enemies. So it's not objective. Your report card, because citizens are directly responding to it in that survey, is more objective about the quality of the public administration at the local level. And if that is terrible, we will change them lock, stock, and barrel. And then they ask me, if your definition of democracy is, should the rulers be accountable to the ruled? And if the ruled are unhappy, should the rulers be changed? They said, we change them. You don't. Right? Now, so this, therefore, I'd say that something needs to be done about a civil service. That's a negative. Then I come to, another kind of a negative, and these are two fundamental negatives. The other negative is not to focus on basic human development, health, and education for ordinary people. I know we talked about the Mahalanobis plan and this great move to industrialize India and on a socialist pattern, electricity, machines to make machines and all that. And in the process, of course, we created good institutions, the Indian Institutes of Technology, Management, the science institutions, the Tata Institute of Fundamental Research, the Indian Institute of Science, ISRO, Bharat Heavy Electricals, and HAL, Aeronautics, and so on. But we didn't pay attention to primary education. I'd say this though, when the first general election was held, the first election commissioner of India was Sukumar Sen. He went to Nehru and said, we've conducted this election. We made sure that every refugee from Pakistan who moved there, who is now Indian, is able to vote. We managed to do this. We managed to get the electoral rolls updated. So no one who is in India, whether they are in refugee colonies and so on, they moved from Pakistan only a few months ago, they still could vote in the 52 election. And he said, look, in this election, we've used symbols because our electorate is illiterate for the greater part. And they can't read the names of the party. They can't read the names of the candidate. He told Nehru, at some point, you must change this. You must make it obligatory that the voter is able to read in the local language. And there may be more than one. In his locality, the name of the party and the name of the candidate, and remove symbols. Because as long as there's symbols, there's no nudge, no incentive to the political class to educate these people with basic literacy. And this is what we get in behavioral economics now. People get a Nobel Prize for this. What is this? It's a nudge. It's to do something that will change behavior. And we didn't do it. We still have blooming symbols, right? So that's a betrayal of democracy in this country, because you ought to have educated the electorate with basic literacy. Far too late. Now, if you say, where was China what was China's GDP in some year and where we were equal? How did China go ahead? It went ahead because it invested in its people. It taught men and women basic literacy. It taught them basic skills. The plumber will use spirit levels, will use tools. Our plumbers to this day, our electricians to this day cannot read a circuit map, cannot read a set of instructions that come with the tools that are placed in their hands. That's a pathetic state we are in. And this is criminal to have done this, particularly when you had great advice as to this. Great advice saying, look, all this heavy industry, machines to make machines won't work. Produce wage goods that the masses will buy. This was the recommendation that came. And at that time, Mehta was the deputy chairman of the Planning Commission. Indira Gandhi was the chair. And this was done by economists. There was a project involving Kirit Parekh, Andre Lefebvre, Shukumoy Chakravarti, and Richard Ecos. They produced an equilibrium model called SELF, Chakravarti, Ecos, Lefebvre, Parekh, a non-linear input-output model to replace the Leontief fixed coefficient model, okay? They recommended that we move away and produce wage goods. But then politically, this particular advice from our ambassador B.K. Noru to Mr. Mehta was leaked. It was publicized in a magazine called Frontier, run by the communists. And so the editorial that Samar Sen in Frontier wrote was, whose plan is it? Saying that this is a plan that's being recommended by MIT. Is it our plan? So that's enough to kill a political decision. Indira Gandhi may well have said, okay, maybe this makes sense. We should shift. We shifted in 91 out of duress because we were in a crisis. We didn't shift it voluntarily. We shifted it out of duress. But it could have been done then. But we didn't because of the political circumstances. Politics, the interplay of politics and economics is such. So I'd say that And then, but I would say the one good thing, which is our future, is the decision which we haven't acted upon in most places, is to devolve power to local authority, right? At the panchayat level. The Europeans call it the principle of subsidiarity. Handle a problem where it is felt, where you might find a solution to it. But if you need to go up to a higher level, go up to a higher level, but only if necessary. Otherwise, deal with the problem at the local level. So you can say education. Okay, you create educational syllabus, but you need some kind of uniformity for the whole state or for the whole country. Then you go up to a higher level and say, we will look at the NCERT syllabus, but the issue is that you must handle these things. The 73rd and the 74th Amendment are there. It depends on the states to enforce them, because the amendment doesn't actually enforce the devolution of funds, functionaries, and powers to the local authority. It says the state government would do it, and human nature being what it is, we all say decentralization is very good, but only up to my level, right? And so very few states have devolved. Karnataka started it, and this has produced a major revolution in terms of women's participation in politics. Because those two acts require that you have 1/3 of women, and they also have responsibility in the committees. So initially you would say, oh, to a sarpanch pati hai, the wife is a gudiya. No, Indira Gandhi was considered to be a gudiya by the leaders of the Congress party, and see what she became. If Indira Gandhi became what she became, not a gudiya who will listen to these big lords of the party, every woman in every village in India is capable of becoming an Indira Gandhi in that way. And so we have a good thing there. We have to act on it. So I'll stop there, Subodh.
Thank you so much for such a clear and passionate discussion and elocution. Let me add one comment, which is not a comment. I don't comment on what people say, but I will say that you mentioned VP Menon. VP Menon has been forgotten.
Yeah.
VP Menon actually integrated the Indian states.
Yes.
He was the man who was going across India. Sardar Patel was running the Home Ministry. So
Yeah.
VP Menon, and let me tell you a funny story about VP Menon. He went to a state called Jodhpur, which is in Rajasthan, right? And the Maharaja of Jodhpur was a trained pilot. He was a daredevil of a pilot. And he told VP Menon, I will sign, but only after you go on a plane ride with me. So VP Menon, poor man, the Maharaja of Jodhpur was a daredevil pilot. He used to fly under electricity wires. So he would take his plane down under electricity wires, under telephone wires, and VP Menon is saying, what have I signed up for? And actually, fortunately, they didn't crash. But VP Menon, I think that was the scariest moment of his life with the drunk Maharaja. And actually, just to continue, the Maharaja of Jodhpur stood for every single Vidhan Sabha constituency in the 1952 election, and he won each one of them. And to celebrate, he took his plane out and to go under the electricity and phone wires, and he crashed and he died. So VP Menon was very lucky that the Maharaja was not so drunk with joy at the time that he didn't crash his plane. Now, one minor comment, you mentioned CELF plan. Sukumar Chakravarti was a professor at Delhi School of Economics when I was a student there, and he left the university to become a member of the Planning Commission. Okay. And then you mentioned the second name was Ecos. Ecos was my number 2 thesis committee advisor. So I said, oh my God, he's talking about 2 people on my, one was my professor. And Sukumar Chakravarti was a man you couldn't understand. Okay. If you were not a diligent student, and I was certainly not a diligent student, and it showed in the exam results, but Sukumar Chakravarti was brilliant, eloquent, and far-thinking, and his premature death was certainly something, a loss for India. Okay, so these are two personal
Yeah,
stories.
thanks. Nice to
Yeah,
have
okay.
these personal anecdotes and connections.
Yeah, just an anecdote. I don't want to comment on the substance. The substance was very clearly laid out. And, there are times when I think about the same things that you did. Let me hold off my comments. Let's go to the next speaker, TCA Raghavan. He was a fellow student at Delhi School of Economics with me. He became an economic journalist. So,
Nadu.
Nadu. Nadu. That's how, I won't go into why his name became Nadu. Let's have him. Okay, Nadu, please. Show yourself. He is visiting his son in Switzerland, but he has agreed to be here. Maybe I see where the heck is he? He's off. Okay, he'll come back at some other point. I'm sure he will. So at the meantime, let's go with Abhishek Anand. Abhishek, you are there?
Yeah.
Abhishek, please, let's hear from you. Okay.
Yeah, so thanks a lot for having me here. I'm just supposed to be a participant, but
No,
maybe
please just introduce yourself. Okay.
Yeah. I'm Abhishek Anand. I am currently running my own consulting firm based in Kochi. It's called Insignia Policy Research. But prior to this, I was part of Indian government working as an Indian Economic Service officer. And then I worked briefly at the World Bank as an economist. In fact, good to see Rajat because Rajat was a consultant there. So we overlapped for a few months when Rajat was still there. But I think TC Raghavan is back, so maybe we should go back to him. And
Okay,
I can
good. Yeah, all right, Nadu, please. Sorry to use the nickname.
Can you guys hear me though?
Of course, we can hear you.
And you can see me great.
The whole world can hear you, TCA.
Okay. I'm going to speak softly because my grandchildren are sleeping in the next room.
Okay.
And you don't want to wake them up. But first of all, let me say hi to Sudarshan. Enada, how are you? It's been bloody
Jubilee Hall,
ages.
man, Jubilee Hall, can't forget.
It's been 45 years or something.
45, you don't know how to count.
Subodh was in my class and Sudarshan was a year junior, I think. And we sort of, sailed along, all of us. I joined publishing as economics editor for Macmillan in India. And after 5 years, I got fed up of that and I became a journalist, starting right at the bottom. And I was lucky because in those days, people who could write English didn't know economics. And those who knew economics couldn't write English. So I was one of the fortunate ones who knew a little bit of both, thodi Angrezi, thodi economics, and that went a long way in those days. So there I was, enjoying myself thoroughly. Now, Subodh said that two things that went right between 1947 and 1967, and two things that went wrong. Sudarshan has said most of it, actually. There's really not very much more that I can add, except that on the Constitution, I was actually invited by the Venkachalaya committee to make some kind of informal presentation. They didn't want a journalist making a formal presentation, so it's not part of the record. But he did ask me a few times to come and tell him what I thought was the problem. I think he was doing what Subodh is doing, asking young fellows. I told him that, look, I mean, there are these three lists are outdated. We are now talking of 2000, 2001. I said the concurrent list should be disbanded.
Yes.
And the bulk of it should be transferred to the state list. And a few things only should be there with the central list. He just smiled. Then the Constitution itself, the problem has always been, right from the start, that it is far more process-oriented than any other constitution in the world. 395 articles or whatever it has, some huge number. I've studied it in great detail, in great depth. Nearly 65 to 70% of the articles are process oriented. They're not substantive in that sense. And that's a huge problem in actually governing the country. A constitution is supposed to state the objectives. It's not supposed to tell the government and others how to do it. So that's one problem that needs to be sorted out in the coming years. I don't know whether it will be. The other problem that I see, which again, I mean, this problem could have been sorted out in the first 20 years, but it wasn't. Maybe it was not identified. I don't know. The other problem is that it's not strictly in the 20-year period till 67, but it happened just 4 or 5 years after that, which is that the attention of the political class, it's shifted from efficiency to equity. And the benchmark here, whatever, was when Indira Gandhi won the 71 election. And then in the 72 election, she won all the states. And there was a clear shift away from efficiency to the equity part of it, which meant that investment got completely reoriented, and policies that governed investment and all the stuff that goes with it, these shifted towards, the balance shifted towards equity. And we still have that problem. And it's taking a very heavy toll of just government finances to begin with. So these are two things that very briefly, I would say that, the Constitution is a great piece of work, the first 30 odd articles. Many of them are not. So that needs fixing. And this equity efficiency thing, 91 reforms were supposed to shift the focus towards equity, towards efficiency, but that it happened only very partially. And it still hasn't happened fully. And that's the main difference between China and India. The Chinese approach to equity is that the economy should be efficient. And our approach to the economy is that efficiency should be equitable. So this is a problem which we're not able to sort out because of the political incentives that we have. Winning is the only thing that matters. Fair enough. Good things. I think the first 20 years, it was very clearly established that India would have a very strong state, a state that would not brook any challenges. And in those days, the term used was unity and integrity of India. And there was another term which we have now all forgotten. It was called fissiparous tendencies, if you recall.
Yes.
These fissiparous tendencies had to be fought with a lot of brutal power, police power, army power, and so on. And that was a very good thing. At that time, had we faltered in those 20 years, things would have turned out very differently. The state was able to demonstrate to anybody who was having a go at the country and unity, integrity, all of that, it was able to demonstrate to them very effectively that tum kuch bhi kar lo, we will not let you succeed. So whether it was in Northeast, Punjab, anywhere, these challenges would not be tolerated. So that was a very, very good thing. A second good thing that happened in those years, those 20 years, was a concession by the executive, reluctant, even in the case of Nehru, pretty reluctant, but even in the final analysis, the concession was made that the judiciary was the judiciary, and it would not be, what's the word, silenced, curbed, brought to heel, whatever. In 1962, there was an American researcher called Gadbois, Gadbois, who wrote a book on the Supreme Court in India. And in that, if you can get hold of a copy, since you're all researchers, if you can get a copy, read it. It shows how various provisions of the Constitution actually were not to the liking of the executive, how the executive actually did try to curb them, but in a very half-hearted way. Nehru would have liked to have had a tame judiciary, but he didn't. His heart was not on it, really, in the way that Indira Gandhi's was later on. So this really is nothing except a concession to the judiciary to to give it proper respect. That's a major positive, because if you look at the major judgments that we've had, Keshavananda Bharati case, Golaknath case, the Bommai case, S.R. Bommai case, a whole string of judgments numbering around 20, which have maintained India in the way that a country should be run, wherein the judiciary does have final say in a lot of things. We don't normally think about these things, but as Sudarshan said, we are extremely lucky. So Subodh, I'm going to stop there, because I would really be repeating myself and repeating what Sudarshan said, so we can go straight into any kind of discussion that you have in mind.
Hang on, before the discussion, let me put a plug for myself now. In my forthcoming book on public policy, the key point that I make is that the judiciary is a maker of public policy, not just the executive. And there is a whole chapter on Supreme Court cases international and Supreme Court cases US. And in the section on international cases, there is a pretty large section on Indian Supreme Court. And some of the cases that you mentioned are in the discussion. Just for the sake of some of the younger people, there was a lot of clash between the Supreme Court and the government right from the very start. In fact, from 1951 itself, the Constitution came into power in 1950, and the right to property was coming in the way of land reform. And there were the Keshavanand Bharati, which TCA mentioned. Keshavanand Bharati is a land reform case, is a land case. And those cases were right from the start clash, and how to bypass the Supreme Court. That's also in the book. So it's a very important part for everybody to know that in India, the Supreme Court is very powerful. And to follow up on Sudarshan's point, the US Constitution doesn't say that the US Supreme Court is the final interpreter of the Constitution. It's said in the Indian Constitution, but it's not in the US Constitution. That power was taken by the first Chief Justice. In a famous case, Marbury versus Madison, he took over the power of interpreting the Constitution. The Constitution doesn't say that the final interpretation of the Constitution will be done by the Supreme Court. But they said, no, this is it. We are the final interpreter. And who's going to challenge that? You're going to file a case in the Supreme Court to say that you're not the final interpreter. Everybody agrees. So yes, I think just adding from the side. Okay, we still have Abhishek Anand to come in, though he said he won't have his points of view, but I'm sure by now he has some points of view. He's a distinguished young fellow. By young, I mean younger than me. He's not quite that young, but let's go, Abhishek.
Thanks. I'll keep it very short. Of course, I had not prepared my own points, but just listening to each one of you, and it was fascinating. I just learned so many new stuff. I'll just share some of my own thinking about these issues. So, if we just consider what has India achieved in first maybe 10, 15, 20 years of independence. And one thing which I believe, even now I just get amazed by it, is the fact that right after independence, we opted for universal adult franchise. And I can't think of any other country that had universal adult franchise right after independence. US, any of the European countries, I don't know, they took decades. And Switzerland, they gave voting rights to women only in 1970. So for me, I think apart from Constituent Assembly, having a constitution, just giving universal adult franchise, I think it's remarkable.
Hang on. Abhishek, I just cannot help myself. It not only is remarkable, it is unbelievable. It is unbelievable that a country in which the literacy rate for women was like 10% could say they are going to elect the people who will rule the country. It is unbelievable. And not only is it unbelievable, they actually voted.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry to interrupt, but I find it, you said perhaps there's no other country. I would say there is no other country. This is
Right.
okay, sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, no problem. So the second, I'll go back to what Dr. Sudarshan mentioned, because just like him, I have been civil servant in the past, and I'm very critical of the way civil servants operate. But one thing which I find remarkable, I mean, in the first few years, I guess the capacity, at times I feel that the state capacity was maybe much better in the first few years of our independence. So he gave example of how the electoral college was updated very short time, and everyone, in fact, most of the people voted. The second example that comes to my mind, and I was recently speaking to Dr. Subramanian, who was the former chief economic advisor, and he told it to me. I didn't know about it. Is how post-partition in Punjab, all the people who shifted from the Pakistan part of Punjab to Indian part of Punjab, and how the whole land consolidation happened. Because of course, these people who shifted to India, they had much more land there in Pakistan, and we had much lesser land available here in Punjab, Indian part of Punjab. So how the reallocation happened and making sure that it was progressive, I think that's remarkable. And I find it amazing how over time, maybe the state capacity to do some of these remarkable things has gone down. And of course, for many of the issues that we feel is there in India, I mean, of course, there's no getting away from the fact that civil servants are largely responsible. I mean, I'll not say any bad policy, but I feel that, of course, I mean, hindsight, we have the benefit of hindsight. We can go back in time and we can pick and choose, okay, maybe this was good, this was bad. But one thing which I feel very strongly about is that, in many of the cases, we knew that, okay, we started with something, maybe that's not working out, but we could never course correct. And I don't know why does that happen. Of course, democracy has a big role to play in it. And I'll just give an example. So I was in the Ministry of Finance and we were writing a chapter. And as part of that chapter, we were just compiling all the schemes that different state governments and the central government runs. And we just got to know, there are like hundreds. And if you combine states, there will be easily few thousand social welfare schemes. And many of those schemes are very small. And the oldest scheme that we came across was a scheme for cows, primarily for cows, other animals as well, which was 96 years old. And this was in 2016, I'm talking about 2016-17. A scheme 96 years old, barely few crores of allocation. But then you just imagine, I mean, what kind of impact will it make? A lot of resources are devoting to it, not in terms of financial, but of course, human resources. And it's a very small scheme. And there are many schemes like that. The point that I'm trying to make is that we do realize over time that some of the schemes are not working. We should maybe try and get rid of it. But perhaps the political economy doesn't allow us to kill some of those pre-existing schemes. We just keep on adding new and new schemes, despite knowing that some of the prior schemes, perhaps, we should just get rid of them, but that never happens. One very interesting issue which Mr. Raghavan, he referred to, how the balance between equity and efficiency over time has tilted towards equity. And I strongly feel about it because I work with some of the state governments now, and I feel that very strongly. And I actually felt that maybe, in the 60s, 70s, 80s, you had a case for having more focus on equity because perhaps you did not have enough financial resources. And so you wanted to make sure that whatever financial resources we have to try and allocate it between different sections of society. But over time, perhaps fiscal constraint is not big an issue, but you still see how almost every mechanism that governments have in their hand is used for equity considerations. Just to give an example, increasingly in last few years, every election, for example, electricity pricing has become a big talking point for any party, and we give free electricity. For example, in Punjab, 95% of the households will get free electricity. Now, do we really need to give free electricity to 95% of the households? And that's the case in most of the states where we have been giving free electricity. And increasingly over time, it looks like this trend will pick up. So basically, you have much better resources available. You have direct benefit transfers, if at all you want to have equity considerations. But we want to somehow use every pricing mechanism that the center or the state has at their disposal to try and maintain equity, and in the process, of course, efficiency, and then the financial power that you may have and the financial pool that you will have available, that gets a hit. So I do feel that I don't know when that trend started, but specifically now, the more I work with some of these governments, I feel that we are going overboard. I mean, of course, equity has to be there. We have to think about it, but it's just that when you try and use every tool that you have for equity, in the process, it's the people who suffer and people who actually deserve support from the center or from the state. So I'll just stop there. I just wanted to share my thoughts, not really, bad or good policy, but my thoughts about what other people shared.
Okay, since we are in the discussion phase, let me add just one comment here, that 3 years ago, I wrote that India is now in subsidy Raj. Okay, the state governments and the union government, they have been obsessed with subsidy Raj. It's not efficiency that they have discredited. You can still be inefficient, but the allocation to production has gone down of the financial allocation of budgets. There's so much more on subsidy schemes. And I think somebody needs to calculate what is the level of subsidies in the budgets. And for a country that claims to be on, fast growing, highest GDP, this, that, and all, why is the share of subsidies still so high? This is what I also hear from you. And I wrote an op-ed in the Hindu saying that we need to put, just as we have a deficit GDP cap, we need a subsidy cap. Because without it, there's no way that we are going to reduce the allure of political subsidies. Everybody is Karnataka won on 5 economic guarantees. You see it everywhere. It's not a political thing. India is in subsidy Raj. The governments are in subsidy Raj. So that's my phrase. We are in subsidy Raj, and we are unfortunately not at a time when the economy has done so much better than in the past. I could understand the subsidy Raj in 1960s, right? But to have a subsidy Raj in 2025, that is okay. Let me stop. Okay.
I just want to tell you a story from what Abhishek said about why are old schemes not killed. I was on a flight once. I mean, we were a group going somewhere with a gentleman who was at that time the secretary to the president. But when he was a more junior officer in the IAS, he had been the collector in a place called Dindigal in Tamil Nadu. And he was doing his normal inspection of the treasury, the bills and so on, what was coming, what was going out. He found that there were about 40 files comprising invoices for cigars being sent to Winston Churchill. And this was the year 1974. And Churchill had died in 64. And from 1924 onwards, cigars had been going to Churchill, and there was no record of any payment being received. The bill was sent, but whether the money came, whatever the amount of money, there was no record of it. So he called the treasury officer and he said, "What is this?" And he said, "I don't know, sir, but this has been there and I have not disturbed it." So the usual thing happened and they did an inquiry and all. Why were cigars going to London for 10 years after Churchill had died? And what had happened to those cigars? And who had paid for it? There was no record. The point, and then this guy, he stopped it. He issued a formal order saying that these cigars should now stop going to London. The point is that in government, nothing dies.
Yes.
It's once you've got a line item, you only have to look at the railways. If you've been in the Ministry of Finance, you might or might not have looked at the railways, but they have something like 18,000 schemes which were sanctioned over the last 60 years. Unko har saal they give them 2 crore, 3 crore. It's not enough even to buy a cup of tea, but it's there.
Well, I have to tell you a story that underlines Nadu's point. Iqbal Gulati was asked to look at the civil service positions in Kerala. He was the deputy chairman of the Planning Commission of Kerala. And then he found that there's Travaco Cochin that had some civil service posts. And then Malabar had been added to Kerala, which from the Madras presidency. And the Malabar civil service list had two posts for which people were paid. One was called LBK and the other was called LBM. So he couldn't figure out what is this LBK, LBM, that the Malabar districts are still drawing money from the revenue and paying people for it. So his inquiry led to a story, which is that in about 1930, Lord Linlithgow had come to give a report on agriculture and animal husbandry. And he said that the Indian cows yield very small quantity of milk. But if they were to be crossbred with Jersey cows, Jersey bulls, the Jersey cow yields a lot of milk. You would increase the milk production of Indian cows. Now, this report was submitted and shelved and nobody thought anything about it, as often happens in government, whether it's a British Raj or the Indian government of today. But then Linlithgow comes back as viceroy, and the governor of Madras thinks now that he has to ingratiate himself to the viceroy by acting upon his report. So he created 2 posts. One is called Linlithgow Bull Keeper, LBK. That person was given the bull imported from Jersey to be in his care and with some money to maintain the bull. But then how are you to ensure that the bull keeper does his job? It's a bureaucratic mentality. You've got to have a Linlithgow bull minder, an LBM, who made sure that the farmer who had the bull serviced the bull, made it work, right? So you had these 2 positions that were created and salaries were allotted. And long after independence, Iqbal Gulati discovers there are still people in the Kerala government drawing salaries as Linlithgow bull keeper and Linlithgow bull minder. Now that's the state of our bureaucracy. That's why I say that the most important reform we need is reform this bureaucracy. I don't know in what way or form, but this is terrible. Nowadays, people join the Indian civil service not because they are motivated to serve the country, but because it fetches a high dowry. Go to Mussoorie and ask them. There are wet posts. You're in the customs and excise, you get a higher dowry. If you're in the foreign service, you get the least dowry. It's a dry post, foreign service. Customs, excise, income tax, wet post, high dowry.
Okay, well, thank you so much. Let's give Pooja a chance. She's the youngest here. So let's give Pooja a chance to ask questions. Pooja, are you there? She seems to have vanished. Okay, Rajat.
No, sir, I'm here.
Good. So please go. It's your turn.
Yes, sir.
So any
So first of
comments
all,
or any questions to anyone?
Rajat, it was very insightful that you have presented on the 5-year plans and the imperative planning. So I like the way you discussed about like how the what are the good policies and bad policies and how it resonates with India today. And Professor Sudarshan also like he talked about the India's political system and how it developed over the years. Then Professor Subayed also I heard comments with the on Abhishek sir also. So I just like to thank all every one of you for the insightful presentations and like discussions on the. So I don't have any questions. I'm just a young scholar and I just want to hear the insights from all of you. So it was very insightful and it was a very good experience for me to hear from Professor Sudarshan and Professor Srinivasan.
Okay, let's go, Rajat.
And
Your turn.
I do not have any question as such, but just a curious mindset which I had like 5 years ago when I started my PhD. I did my PhD in the financial inclusion, and
yes,
I was amazed about the direct benefit transfer. So, like before the Jandhan Yojana to 2014, all the schemes which originated under the UPA 2 era, either it was MG Narega or Food and Security Act, NFSA, or the Right to Information Act, and all those things were some kind of creating capability to the individuals. And at that time, I was thinking, at least if we should give some kind of universal basic income to the poor, so they will also get a capability and they will take this basic income to regenerate more productive resources further on. But now after the 5 years when so many schemes has been launched, and as you mentioned Professor Subodh about the subsidy Raj, so now I also looked at the data when I think like proper activities are not going to the well to the people who want it, but it's not creating capability. On the other side, my previous hypothesis was it should create capability to the underserved population and then they will use it for the productive things. But now somehow I am looking at the different point of view when the productivity is not generating, and I think we should go back to the kind of UPA 2 policies had been enacted where the MG Narega, and I propose to the some of the eminent economists also to the policymakers, we should have urban MG Narega also, so that the some kind of capability which rural population has that goes to the urban population also, urban poor also. So that's it, and I think it will go on, and I think uh, as I mentioned about the second plan also, like the complementary thing, so DBT cannot be vanished once, subsidies cannot be vanished, but it should go with some kind of capabilities also
Okay.
complementary.
Yeah, all right, good. Thank you, Rajat. Okay, I think we are sort of running out of time. I'd just like to, before we go, if you wish, you can answer this question. On a scale of 1 to 5, how optimistic are you about India's future?
I am very optimistic person, so I don't like this 2047 vision Vikshit Bharat because I am a kind of a short term vision person, but I am optimistic and I think India will grow, and my number would be 4 out of 5.
Okay, great. Pooja, will you answer this question?
You're muted.
I'm muted? No,
Unmute.
Pooja is muted.
Pooja.
sorry,
Unmute.
sorry, sir, sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
So,
how optimistic are you about the India's future?
sir, I'm also very optimistic, but I don't want to rate or something. Okay, like between 3 or 4, I can rate. It depends on like how we see the future policies, or like whether we are focusing on groundbreaking policies or not, whether we are going into the regional disparities or not. So it's not just about making the macroeconomic policies. So it's about making every corner of India access to those services or what like previous generations have required. So it's about reaching to every section of the society. So if we focus on the disparity, so we can have the multiplier impact in our country, what I see. And in that scenario, I think that if we go in that direction, we can have optimistic future, and based also on education and health. So like over the years, we have been discussing about education and health. So it's the basic, the high time we should focus on our health systems, the GDP, like the percentage. We are spending less percentage of our GDP on our health and education. So we should follow other countries' systems, and we should see how they have implemented their system so that we can bring it in our country and focus on to the the root level sections of the society. So for me, it's like uh, going into the deeper part of our country, and then I'm like kind of optimistic about.
Okay, for the others who are seniors, final word, please. What is your final word? So we'll start with Abhishek. Final word. After hearing everything, first the final word.
So my final word would be, I'll just build on what others before me said, is that I think we have to be optimistic for the reason that I would say there is a chance right now, because whatever is happening whatever is happening in China, and India perhaps tends to benefit from them. My pessimism runs from the fact that, we had this window of opportunity for last 5 to 6 years, but policymakers, I don't think they did anything to capitalize on that. In fact, we are going backward in time, is what I would say. So somewhere, I would say that while there is an opportunity, uh, I am not very sure if our policymakers will be there to seize this opportunity.
Okay, good. All right. So the two seniors, Professor Sudarshan.
I see. Oh, I'm optimistic. I think regardless of, you see, in the kind of situation the world is in, climate change and so on, I think the Indian people have a basic values of frugality, respect for nature, don't, so there may be a small section that imitates the West and wants to be, their weddings and destination locations and so on. But by and large, the majority of the population of India are people well grounded in how to adapt to adversity, how not to make too many demands on nature. So in this situation that the world is in, I think our population is best placed to make very minimal demands on natural resources, carbon and all that. And so regardless of which government is there, I think these kinds of basic values with which the majority of the population have grown up, which is that, adversity has its virtues, and we've been in adversity. And we also have the fact that, it's Atiti Devo Bhava. We will be generous to strangers. The levels of poverty in India have been sustained not because of the government giving this and that, but because fellow poor people have supported other poor people, their relatives, their neighbors, their friends. This is a great strength of India. This is a strength that is needed for the world at large. It doesn't matter which government is in power. And the other point I want to say is I have great faith in the Indian electorate.
Mm-hmm.
After all, when Mrs. Indira Gandhi thought the trains are running in time, everything is hunky-dory, and she, at a Democrat at heart, lifted the emergency, she needn't have. She had gone on like some dictator, but she did. And the electorate gave the answer. They gave the verdict at what they thought. So I think we must trust our electorate, and we must trust our values in terms of not being acquisitive and not being, materialistic, and to think in terms of, there's more to life than possessions and consumerism. I think that is a great strength of India, and it will see us through and put us in a position much better than most other countries in the world.
Okay, thank you. That's a very, very optimistic view coming from fundamentals rather than from public policy as such. The fundamentals are important, and the fundamentals are, according to Professor Sudarshan, the strength of India, and that's what will see us through, and it has seen us through a lot. I mean, nobody said it, but we are the only country that had non-violent independence movement, right? So we have been through it. Okay, finally, let me not talk so much. My friend TCA. Final word.
I am, from what Sudarshan just said, I'm reminded of जब हम लोग छोटे थे in that Ramayana in the colony, there used to be some chaps who used to do the Ramayana. And some 2 or 3 lines stick in my memory. Lakshman tells his mother that Ram chale wan ko mata, hum bhi chale jayenge. So Kaushalya says, bhook lagegi beta, khana kahan khaoge? So Lakshman says, ढूंढ लेंगे कंदमूल, खाते चले जाएंगे. So Kaushalya says, प्यास लगेगी बेटा, पानी कहाँ पियोगे? So he says, खोद लेंगे कुएं माता, पीते चले जाएंगे. This is the quintessential Indian philosophy, that aspiration is linked to need. It is not linked to greed. You have a two-wheeler, you might want a Maruti 800 in those days. I mean, now I don't know what the entry-level car is, Alto or something. But it's a fundamental quality of Indian society that Sudarshan mentioned. One is of cooperation, and the other is of non-acquisitive aspiration. Now, this has very important economic consequences. If your aspiration level, you're earning $100, you want to allocate that money after you've met your overhead costs. Will you buy a car, or will you spend it on your son's or daughter's education? The average Indian chooses education. It's an investment in human resources.
Future.
This is very, very important. You can see it all over. I mean, even in completely backward states like Bihar, where all the normal standard economic indicators are so poor, this one factor कि बच्चों को पढ़ाएंगे, it's a different matter. Hindi में पढ़ाएंगे, अंग्रेजी में पढ़ाएंगे, all that nonsense goes on because of politics. But the fact that your aspiration is guided by need and an investment in future, it pretty much guarantees India's future for the next 60, 70, 80 years. Governments are irrelevant to it, as he said. That's what I think. So on a scale of 4 to 5, so what? 5 दे देते हैं यार.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you so much, everybody. I think it has been a very wonderful discussion. People have brought out so many different points of view. I haven't heard so many different points of view as I've heard today. And I think all of us have heard, and I hope that my plan is to we have had 3 panels. My plan is to summarize what comes out of the 3 panels, and hopefully write an op-ed in an Indian newspaper, so that video takes long, that we do have. I will post. I found out that it takes quite a bit of time to process long videos. It's not. Computers need to be more powerful than my computer. It takes time, but I'll get it done. And thank you all so much. Let's end it here. And thank you all, Pooja, especially youngest of here. I must thank her, and of course TCA, my friend, always obliging to be here. All right, thank you, everybody.
Thank
And
you.
let's say bye.
Thank you. Thank
Bye.
you.
Thank you,
Bye,
Subodh.
bye, bye, bye.
Bye.